every weekday. They're wrong not to, and so I'll make them quick. Apologies for any inconvenience. Today, well, two videos today actually, but it's supposed to be on Thursday. Let's talk about the importance of architecture. Let's generally think about this. Why is it that we make architecture the way we do? Why do we design it in such a way? There's a few reasons. One, of course, is just practicality. When it comes to design, you tend to focus on just what works. What materials do you have access to? How much can you afford? And just how effective would it be at its intended task? You wouldn't make a bridge out of sticks. You make it out of logs, carved wood, stone, or something else that can be effectively assembled into a bridge. It's the same thing with most just practical structures. Some of the road. What you want to do is make sure the road functions given increased traffic of whatever you're dealing with. Could be cars in the modern era, in the past to be carriages, etc., etc. Another is aesthetics. You want it to look good. This is especially true where I'm at. The District of Columbia has a lot of aesthetic buildings. Why? Well, because when you're designing things, especially for important areas and for important ceremonies, you want to look good. The White House is an easy example. When you want people to look at the president's house, you want them to think, wow, that is a good place. It looks beautiful. It really helps people when it comes to dealing with it. Another thing is, of course, the projection of power. This is especially seen in, for example, the Taj Mahal and other buildings which were constructed with knowledge of, well, other people. And Taj Mahal is an exception to this arguably because it was built as a mausoleum for a wife of a emperor of India, well, the Mughal Empire really, but it controlled most of India, so it counts. But when it comes to, for example, the Colosseum, a lot of that was projection, showing off what you could do to the rest of the world, and especially your citizens. That is a very important thing. Churches were very similar. It showed you devotion to God. It was a projection of your loyalty to both the church, the state, and just your general wealth. And so, people built big churches. The Old Minster doesn't need to be as big as it is. The Cologne Cathedral does not need to be as big as it is. But they are the way they are. One, for obviously aesthetics, but also to show power, to show influence, and to show devotion. It is a way of saying, I am loyal. I am willing to do this in something's name, or I have money, I can build this, I can ensure this is created. Look at it. And remember, I'm the guy who rules you, or otherwise I'm an influential person. And so that's exactly what they do. They make these things with the express purpose of projecting power. And so architecture becomes a very important aspect of statecraft. Now, of course, there are many different styles, which all depend on what you're trying to reference. For example, if you're trying to go off of Greek and Latin, or Roman construction, like here we do in DC, you would use the neoclassical style, or a very similar style. Going for the Middle Ages, old Europe, you'd go for Gothic or Baroque. And of course, there are many others for more specific times, and the modernist style tends to be more, basically effective. It's more about efficiency than anything. It's not exactly the best to look at. It's basically ignoring option number 2, aesthetics, and looking purely at power projection and just getting things done. You'll see this too in DC with a lot of office buildings. The Federal Reserve building doesn't look that great. It's not meant to. Or rather, the IRS building. I may be confusing the two. The point still stands regardless, because most of the buildings, when it comes to actual stuff like that, is in more of a brutalist style. Why? Because it's just efficient. You don't need people going to the Department of Agriculture and going, ah yes, look at that lovely design. No. Guarantee most of the people going there are either people working for the department or people who need to file a complaint with the department. They do not care. And so it's all about showing, one, that you have the resources to build the damn thing, and two, making sure it does its job, stays up, and lasts for a long time. That is its purpose. It doesn't have any ulterior purpose. It just has a job, and it does it. The Soviets especially were big fans of brutalist architecture because, well, they were hyper materials. When you're dealing with something of an ideology that relies heavily on this belief of essentially what matters is material, labor, etc., and also we need to fill these people with these rooms and just basically ensure that everyone has something that they need, you tend to go with a more efficient, brutalist style rather than some architectural marvel. You're not exactly going to be building a Jefferson Memorial every time you need to build a new house for some person to move into. And so, as a result, you naturally see the Soviets concentrate instead on building brutalist, what people call commie blocks, or basically brutalist architecture built for apartments that would be able to fill a lot of people and a lot of families very cheaply and efficiently. Now, of course, the party officials have their own houses, but the commie blocks are an example of what the Soviets would tend to build because that's where the majority would go. And so, architecture becomes essentially a way of viewing the state's outlook. For example, modeling off of ancient Greece and Rome, like in DC, the brutalism of the Soviets, or the Gothic style that the German Empire preferred. Now, of course, things mixed, that's just how things are. Venice, especially, was actually really known for this and has a lot of different architectural styles in it. And, of course, you go to old places near the Mediterranean, you'll see that as well. See, when it comes to architecture, it all varies based on personal taste. For example, who's the person commissioning it or designing it, what do they like? But also, what's most practical at the time and what are people thinking about? Basically, sure, I may want to use marble, but can I afford it? If not, I'm probably not going to use it. And so instead, I'll get something I can use and can afford. And so, they'll use sandstone instead, or brick, or whatever else they can afford. And so, practical limitations naturally lead to things looking certain ways. And architects can either plan around this or just say, screw it, we're going to do this anyways, even if it's more expensive. They'll usually have budget overruns and stuff like that. It's not exactly a good time for anyone. But hey, if the architect likes it and they can afford it, that's what they'll do. Other things is, of course, competition. Even outside of state politics, like for example, private individuals, they'll also do things for power projection or to project influence. The best example is up north in New York. I'm not pointing at it, but in New York, there's the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, which are right near each other. Now, if you don't know the story behind those buildings, both of them were made in competition because Chrysler and DuPont, if I'm remembering correctly, wanted to build the tallest building in New York, and the tallest building in the world by extension. They were later beaten, but the initial design of them was based around constantly growing upwards so that they could continue basically showing off their wealth and their power. And so they continued to increase the size of these buildings until they got to the point where they were straight up sticking spires onto their buildings, the Empire State Building especially, in order to ensure that they were taller than each other. Which, fun fact, there's whole stories about them using it to disengage Zeppelins and drop people off there. Didn't happen. But that was an official story that they tried to tell. Anyways, it's never just the states that want to protect power. Everyone has their interests and wish to show their strength. To what extent, that depends. More humble people, less so. I mean, let's face it, if you're just looking to get something done as a home person, generally you're not going to go with a mansion. You're going to stick with something smaller, quainter, but more affordable and reasonable. But for those who wish to project power, especially a lot of power, like the arrogant or the ambitious, they tend to go with grander scale projects, and naturally that leads to bigger projects, bigger buildings, and thus styles that are more fancy and decorative. Because they're not after the building for functionality purposes. What they're after is to show off what they can do, what they can afford, and basically just build a little bit of themselves in the skyline of wherever they are. That is all for now.